Oh, hi. So we're back at this again. I think I've seen you all before, or most of you. Tonight, oh, did you give me, is that tonight's? Well, it's tonight right here. She gave me 4 copies of it. Okay, tonight we're starting with a simple question. What does that say next? Oh, I'm supposed to do this. No, that's right, I got it. Maybe. Oh, there it is. Oh, there you go. Do you know that verse? Can you all read it is my question. Or do I need to read it to you? So the goal is that God would give us endurance and encouragement so that we can together give thanks and praise to Him. The goal is that we would work on things together, and that as Christ has welcomed us, we're supposed to welcome other people. Now, who do we welcome? And who are the people out there? The first question is a difficult one. It's, who's your daddy? Historically, that was a very simple question, right? Who's your daddy? Now, how many parents are in quotation marks here, can a newborn infant have without adoption or divorce? We're going to get to that in a second. After a while, we'll talk about substituted judgment. How do you make decisions for other people? And is that appropriate? And finally, we're going to talk about end of life. But there's, oh, I went the wrong direction. There it is. There's the question. Who wants to raise their hand and give me a number? So that's 6 you got? No, I grew up with the deaf. So this is 6. That's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 3. I kid you not. That's 3. So you were saying 3. Who would the 3 be then? And a donor. Donor of what? Sperm. Okay, so that, what he's talking about is technically called artificial insemination by donor sperm. Shorten it up, AID. So that's 3. Close, but not there. Okay, you could have an egg donor. That's called oocyte donor. Now we're up to 4. So the parents that the child is legally belongs to, and gamete cells, sperm and egg from 2 more. That's 4. A surrogate. Does surrogate add anything? I mean, would you call them a parent? They add nutrients, there's their blood, it's all that kind of stuff. We're up to 5. Wendell. Okay, when I started teaching this, a few years ago, that was a theoretical possibility, that you could take the DNA out of one egg and put it in a different egg. So this woman's donor egg, you could change the DNA. That's not a possibility. I mean, it was a possibility in the past. Now it is beginning to happen. So we're now up to, what was that? 6. You have another one you want to add? Well, I intentionally left out all that stuff. I was not getting involved in the legal, how many parents you have. This still says no divorce, no adoption. Are we up to 6? Is that what we're up to? Is that it? Not yet. Lou's question is, can you take a sperm and take the DNA out of it and mess with that and do it? No. Sperm is too simple, guys are too simple, we just don't want anything happening to us. We're not complex enough to just deal with this at all. Women are a little more complex than we are. I went the wrong way again. So, how many we have? We got the legal parents, we got the sperm donor and the egg donor. We got the mitochondrial DNA replacement, that's the one we were just talking about, where they take the DNA out and switch it. We got surrogate, and then we get Texas. Bevo? Oh, sorry. No, there's a case in Texas recently. Have you heard this? So, two moms decided to have a kid, and one mom's is the egg donor, and I think it was done by in vitro. I don't know where the sperm came from at all. And then the other mom carried the kid as the surrogate. Did you hear about this one? I mean, it's within the last month. So they both wanted to share in being the parent. Now, how many parents did you have? I had 2, right? He's going, no, that's an L. Sorry. Or that's 21. You just to confuse you even more. That's an L, or that's 21. So I only had 2, he only had 2 because we're brothers, that's the same 2 people. My kids have, well, 4, I guess, because we never got things done the right way or the usual way or stuff like that, and our 2 children are adopted. So I now put adoption back in, and they had a birth mother and a birth father, and then the 2 of us. Okay. How complicated does this get then? All right, so here it is. Infertility is about 15–20% of the population. 30% of the time, the challenges with the lady. 30% of the time, challenges with the guy. 30% of the time, it's something in between. And then there's us. They never could figure it out. We spent a lot of money. Our doctor has a really nice house. He's a really good guy. He was chairman of the congregation of the big ELCA church in Sioux Falls, which has 5,000 members. We'd go in, and my wife would be up on these things, and she's talking, and he's looking things over, and we're talking church, because, you know, that's what we do. He's the president of church council, and I'm the pastor, and and my wife's like, over here, remember? Yeah, things never change. He's a good guy, though. We went that way once. How do you deal with this? Here are all the treatments. First one is you do the reverse Roman Catholic thing. Does that make sense? Do I have to explain that at all? You look at the calendar, you use a basal thermometer, and you go the opposite direction as the Roman Catholics do. There are some medications. There's AIH, artificial insemination by the husband's sperm, AID. There's an ICSI, yeah. That's where they take a sperm and they just inject it directly straight into the egg. That could be done with a husband's sperm, or it could be done with a donor sperm. You've all heard of in vitro fertilization, right? They take the sperm and the egg, they mix it outside of the womb in a petri dish or somehow, and they put it together. And how many embryos are in storage right now? I don't know. Wendell's going to look it up for me. Thanks. But I think it's like a bunch. And the technical term, a bunch, like well over millions. That are in frozen and that are in nitrogen right now. There's gamete interfallopian transfer. Oh, transger. That's not good. That should be an F in there, not a G. That's where they take the gametes and they put them in the fallopian tube and hope they come together. This is if there's something wrong with the egg production or sperm, or we got all kinds of endometriosis or something like that. You can do that with a ZIFT. You can take the zygote and put it up there. You can have an oocyte donation, an embryo donation. Between an embryo and a... Yes, between a zygote. Yep. Are there ethical issues? Let's take one that's very, just kind of simple. AID. AID stands for artificial insemination donor sperm. This is exactly how every last dairy cow is inseminated right now. Because there are no husbands and there are no bulls on dairy farms. Do you know that? There aren't any. They don't exist. Somewhere they exist, but real dairy farms don't have any. They might have a bull to clean things up later, and that's the way they talk. They clean things up later, but there is no Holstein bull on a dairy farm. It's all done by AI. Is there any problem with that in cows? You could have some lack of genetic diversity, but they work hard on that. Thanks for walking around, Miss Boots. These boots are made for walking. So you could have that. They actually now have, in cows and bovine, they have sex selection already figured out. So you can actually pick out whether you want a male or female coming out of this deal. And they'll give you an 80, 90% rate, something like that. And of course, on a dairy farm, they only want women. That's all they really want, so they go that way. Any problem there? I mean, all of these techniques were developed in bovine stuff, in livestock, in horses, equine. They do that in horses now, too. Any problem? How about humans? If it's okay to do it in a cow, it's okay to do it in a human, right? Yeah, 6 fingers and 6 toes we got going on here. My name is Ignacio Montoya, you killed my father. Prepare to die. 6 fingers and 6 toes. You could have a lack of genetic diversity. Okay, what might happen? I didn't bring the stuff in here. So Robin and I,
siblings could marry each other. And not
they
know
wouldn't
it.
necessarily be siblings, but
Half-siblings.
they could be half siblings. Is that possible?
Sure.
All right, so up our way, I don't know about here, because I don't know Texas very much at all. Up our way, the nearest sperm bank is in the cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And there was a case out of there where everybody picked the same guy. So the women get to pick whoever guy they wanted. And some of this is because husband sperm didn't work, and it's an intact husband-wife family. Some of it is because they didn't want a husband around, and, a variety of reasons. But a lot of people picked this same guy. So there was a thing in the Sioux Falls paper about number 400, and I don't know what number it is, and everybody kind of picked him. And now there's a website, because if you donate sperm, there's this wall saying, we will not give you information about these people, but there's this wall. But the women all got together and we all said, well, we went to the same sperm bank and we all picked this number. Who else did it? And they found out there's a whole bunch of people in our part of the country that this happened. So it's possible that one half sibling could marry another half sibling and we get 6 fingers and 6 toes or whatever it may be. What other problems are there? I guess I heard a voice from Canada. It was down south, but it was back from the back from Canada.
A child wanting to find their parent for genetic reasons or other reasons.
Okay, good night, Randall. What is the impact, I think you're asking, on the child? In some way, the child is now differently related to the mother than the father, right? Now, will the child find out? Well, they won't find out who the father was, because the sperm donor, is the sperm donor a father? What's the impact on the sperm donor someday? I mean, he's just a college kid. He's getting paid $20 to deposit something at the bank. He's not a big deal. He does this, okay. Will someday he wake up and wonder how this all worked out? So there could be an impact on there. There's actually a story out of the University of Michigan where there was the go-to stud. So in the early years, when they had somebody who was needing this, he would come in on any minute notice, and there's like 1,100 kids, they figured out now, are from the go-to stud. He actually was married to one of the nurses that was in the clinic, and it was his job to help out. And so he was helping out people. I mean, he looked at it as a kind of a kindness, as a sacrifice. He did all these things, and now he wonders how many are really out there. So you got, what's the impact on the donor? What's the impact on the child? Would you tell the child this happened? I would think you better, because then you're lying. I mean, we made it very clear to our kids, we never hid it once that they were adopted. Is there any shame in adoption? In fact, you're all adopted. You know that, right? Ephesians says we're all adopted in Christ Jesus. So that's their story. Their story doesn't begin with a hospital. It begins with a Lutheran Social Services where we went and picked them up. So please.
So all those things that are so much part of the natural process, eating natural egg, natural sperm, so the set is no different than a polygamous man years ago and then one. The issue, I think, is when you start to alter the egg and the sperm itself, you're interfering with the natural process. And there's a Chinese guy that's just done this. It's created a huge project. So the problem there is, are you disturbing God's giving, creating that?
All right, did you all hear him? So the question is, he's saying that this is kind of a natural thing. I'm saying already with this one, there are all kinds of issues before you even get to the next one. So this one seems like a pretty simple deal. The one you're talking about, I would firmly agree, is much more complex. And now the real question is unintended consequences. And what else will happen? It is not allowed to happen anywhere in the world right now. But that doesn't mean it isn't happening. The UN has said we cannot do this, but some Chinese guy just did it.
Wasn't there a case where the donor father has been ordered to pay child support for the...
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
I think it was Washington State or something where they had a lesbian couple. They had the child by AID. They went on welfare, and the courts ordered him to pay child support.
I'm not going to get into the legal questions because almost anything can happen now that way. I'm not even going to attempt to try to deal with legal things, but normally there is this wall that says if you donate, we will not tell anybody who this is. What's the other challenge with this now is I'm the child of this relationship. My kids have a little bit of knowledge of who their birth parents, my daughter knows who her birth mother is, but her birth father, she doesn't know much. As she gets older, how will she be able to ask her parents about all the questions that come with when you get to the doctors about what is your relationship with your family and how all these things happen? Did you have heart problems? Did you have kidney trouble? Is it in your all? She doesn't know. If it's a donor sperm and there's this absolute wall, there's no way. In my daughter's case, her birth mother just got diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. Nicole is about, 45 or something like that. And because they know each other, and they're friends on Facebook and all this kind of stuff, Nikki, Sarah's birth mother, said, you better go get tested right now. And then actually they came back about a week later and said, no, you don't need to be tested. It's not actually a genetic thing. But here's just, even of this simple thing, how do you have that kind of stuff? Now, my kids don't know, but this is adoption. Here's another level of it. It's back to you again. Congratulations.
Oh, I was just going to tell you, I have the administrative assistant who works with me is 58, and she did an Ancestry.com test because she was adopted. And long story short, her adoptive parents are dead. She found her real dad. And she's like completely obsessed with it, It's like even her husband's mad at her because she just always wants to go see her newfound dad, who's in his 70s. And she feels like she missed a lifetime. So, I mean, and that's not that's adoption too. But those ancestry tests can have.
Interesting, these kind of things are happening. All right, so here's just some simple things with a simple thing. We haven't gotten to the complex, really hard ones. We just took some ethical issues on a simple one. Genetic diseases. Just want to talk about what's happening today. Cystic fibrosis, this is old facts, but the number of people with these diseases is going way down. Why is it going way down? That last line. How many Down syndrome people will there be born in the next generation? I think the number right now is about 90% of the people who find out they have a child who have Down syndrome, which is not a genetic problem, it's a problem with chromosomes. So it's in the process of the baby dividing and becoming bigger and bigger, that's where it happens. It's not somehow it's in my genetics and my wife's genetics, it's a different kind of a thing. They think that 90% of them are being aborted right now. In Iceland, it's very clear they haven't had one born in many years because they just get rid of them. Is the world a better place without people who have Down syndrome? Or pick your deal, right? I had a student in class when I was teaching undergrad who came into class one day wearing a Yankees shirt. And I made the Darth Vader noise, because this is the evil empire, and a whole bit. I'm making fun of him, and I'm like, why are you wearing a Yankees shirt? Well, you got to go to the Yankees game. Why did you go to the Yankees game? Because I got there because of Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now I'm feeling bad, a little bit. Why did you get to go there for Make-A-Wish Foundation? I have cystic fibrosis. So it was a theoretical question at that point in this class, and all of a sudden it became a very specific question. So I flat out asked him, if they could have saved you from cystic fibrosis, would you have wanted that? His answer was, I don't know. I've always had it. It's me. This is who I am. Is what the strengths that we have make who we are, or is it our failings? And the answer is, sure. Absolutely. This guy at Columbia, New York City. Eliminating disease is a noble goal, but also should give us pause. If a society is so willing to screen aggressively to find these genes, and then to potentially to have them abort the fetuses, what does that say about the value of those lives who have these diseases? And there's also a subtle pressure. If you have a child with Downs, it's going to cost more. And we want to save society all this money. So, you really should do your part as an American. The guy whose library is not very far from here used to say, buy American, do things that way. We know this guy? Something about a W or something, I don't know. But this, what happened now? It went away. But instead, what would happen if it's now your patriotism is called into question because you're having a child that's all going to cost us a lot of money? Already now, health plans are saying if you're overweight, it's going to cost you more money and everybody else more money. So we're going to start charging you, let alone the smokers and the other people in the first place. Okay, so here are the ethical issues. Is there a right to reproduce? Maybe. What's the best interest of the child? I want to have a kid. This is the way I want to do it. It's going to be interesting, that kid that's from two moms, how they're going to explain that whole story someday. Is that the best interest of the child? I don't know. The right to information, do you have a right to information about your genetic origins? Well, now we can get on the internet and we can send in the stuff after we spit a little bit and we take care of it, and we can find out that we are mostly Western European. My brother did this. I have no desire to know these things. I think our genetics are similar. So we're mostly Western European. Our family first came over in, well, yeah, something like that, 1658. We were here before a lot of people. But I already knew my genetic origin. I was born in this country. That makes me native. The right to know about genetic origins. So not only the information about it, but the truth about it. What's the effect on people? And this last one, you know the word eugenics? We are all in favor of eugenics when it comes to bovine, with cows, right? We want to make cows better, and the way we know they make them better is they give more milk, and they have high butter fat. You know this stuff? Does this sound familiar at all? Yeah, I mean, some people have been around farms. So we know what that exactly means. Can we make better people? Should we only let certain people reproduce with each other? What does this sound like? Margaret Sanger, yes. It sounds like Americans in the 20s and 30s, let alone Germans at the same time period. Right? And there was this experiment going on in some far-off country called Minnesota. You may have heard of it, where they were trying to get rid of those who weren't as good as the others. The students today looked at a case in 1972 or 73. This is still going on in a far-off place called Alabama. You may have heard of this, where they were forcibly sterilizing women who they didn't think should be able to reproduce anymore. And doing it in a way they had no idea it was going on. There was a real problem with informed consent. And I don't know about you, but I remember the 70s. Some of you remember the 70s? Some of you don't, I get it. But
I was going to say, some of us were born in the 70s.
well, thank you. What happened now? What did you do?
Well, there's one who wasn't even born.
Caleb, what century were you born in? Oh, the 80s. You know, I remember the 70s, right? The bell-bottoms, the plaid pants, the platform shoes, the lack of... Okay, so that's not working. Let's do something else. So what are the challenges with these treatments?
Dewey has a question.
Oh, yeah, please.
We've talked a lot about impact on the children. A question I have is, what about the impact on the rest of the members of that family?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's going to be a challenge, right? Now, sometimes the rest of the people in that family have the same thing. You know. But how is that all going to work? You notice I didn't answer the question, right? I just raised the question. Oh, okay. Well, let's move on then. We'll move on to substituted judgment. In front of you, I didn't change the name on here, but I changed it in the other place. This lady's name actually is Marcia. That's her real name. I put Susan on there to begin with. So Marcia is a 67-year-old married woman with 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. She has been sick for many years. She's been on disability for a decade. She struggles with dizziness, lightheadedness, and weight. This is a real human being. She was a member of our congregation, and I asked on Sunday her husband, Roger, if I could bring this story. And he said, sure. This happened last summer. She goes to the pulmonologist because of difficulty in breathing. She's been having difficulty in breathing for a long time. But she is cognizant, she's aware, she's everything. She just goes to the pulmonologist. He runs some tests and sends her home. Is that what doctors do? Run some tests, sends her home. Says, I'm not sure what to do. When she gets home, she complains she can't breathe. So what does her husband do? He calls the ambulance. We have ambulances in South Dakota, just in case you're wondering. It's not dog sled, it's like the Canadians in the room. And she's transferred to the big hospital. Oh, no. At the hospital, CPR is needed. She codes, and they put her on a ventilator. A little tiny hospital has 4 beds, something like that. It's just really a first aid station moving you on to the big hospital. Big hospital is a level 3, that's not right? Level 3 trauma unit. Yeah, it's huge in Sioux Falls. She never regains consciousness. After a couple of days of tests, the intensivist wants to know what to do. You know what an intensivist is? You all know that? So there's a hospitalist, they work in hospitals, and intensivist works in intensive care units. So He's an internal med doc normally who is specialized in this kind of medicine. Marcia is her real name, has been an active member of the church all of her adult life. Her family has come together. Some of them live, one son lives in the cities, one son lives in Des Moines, they're all there. Okay, so you're a member of the family unit, you're an aunt, a cousin. What would you ask, or what would you say? Yeah, Steve.
Did she have a living will
Did she have a living will?
or DNA?
Or a
Did she make-
GNR?
Or DNR, excuse me.
Yeah,
Had she
DNR.
made choices around that? I would ask that.
No. Has it ever been discussed? I don't know. Have we ever discussed heaven? She and I had discussed, and her husband had discussed heaven on numerous occasions because, you know, her health wasn't all that great. But she literally is basically pretty fine. You know, she's had trouble, but she's never had anything life-threatening trouble. What does her doctor think are the chances of coming off the ventilator? She is breathing a little bit on her own, but it's mostly the ventilator.
Is she brain dead? Is there any brain activity?
Well, they of course did not run an EEG, if that's what you're asking. They don't normally do that. They would do the tests with, you know, you'd do the little hammer thing and like mess with your bottom of your foot, and it doesn't seem to be much going on. Can't squeeze when you ask her. There are no signs that there's anything going on there. She's laboring, breathing, even with a ventilator. She's certainly not comfortable. Not any of that. How does she feel?
Yeah.
We have no idea. She's not conscious at this point. The doctor has run a couple of days of tests, and they've tried a bunch of things to see what they could do, and he's basically saying there's really nothing more we can do. What we probably need to do now is take her off the ventilator and transfer her to someplace else, because the ICU unit is not really for people who are just here. We probably need to move her somewhere else. You have a little time to think about it, but that's, you know, perhaps what we're going to do. Are you just playing with your hands, Steve, or what? Okay. You're the family. How do you feel?
This is a tough situation.
It's a tough situation. Yeah, no, they're crying. So the two sons are, the husband is about 5 years older than she is. He's 72 now. And the two sons are late 30s, close to 40. They both have wives that are there, and the grandchildren are nearby too.
Well, what do they say? What do they say? What should we do with Mom?
That's what they're asking. And now you're part of that family. I'm making it your decision. And what would you say at this moment?
And what do the doctors tell the family?
Doctors are telling the family, not getting any better.
What does the ethics group say in the hospital?
Well, we haven't gotten to them. We don't need to get to them unless there's a problem.
At this point, I'd say it's between her and God.
At this point, you would say it's between her and God.
I'd take her off the ventilator and see what happens.
Enough is enough. Let's keep her comfortable.
Right.
Let's move her into a situation where she's okay.
Right.
Anybody else got an opinion on that?
Be asked what she would have wanted?
You can ask what she would have wanted. Now, she doesn't have the legal documents, which is what you asked about earlier, but you could ask what she would want it. You could ask that. And the answer would be?
I'm thinking of just, extended family in my situation. I would want them to say, she was a person of faith. What might she, if she could speak, what might she say in this situation?
She knew clearly that Jesus died for her sins and that she's going to heaven someday. Now, did she want to go to heaven that day? No, she wanted to breathe. I mean, it's very clear. I'm in panic. I want to breathe. So it's not that day she wanted to go to heaven. Now, would she want to go to heaven at this point? What's the challenge with asking that question? I couldn't hear you, sorry.
You have to make a life, and you're put in a position to make a decision for someone that can't make a decision.
All right, so you're put in that position, and you don't know what they want.
And because you've made that decision, then you may have the regret if you find out later that maybe something else could have been done.
All right, so you may have to deal with regrets and all kinds of stuff yourself if you're making the decision. But what's wrong with the question of saying, what would she want in this point? Thank you. So you don't know what you want in that point until you're in that point. All kinds of people say, I would never want whatever it is, but then they end up in that situation because of a stroke or, you know, like, is it your dad had a stroke, right? Or, you know, whatever it may be, they might want not say that, but then they end up in that position and go, well, I guess that's not all that bad. It's not as bad as I thought.
You were the minister, right?
I am the pastor. Yeah, I'm her pastor.
You have had discussions with the woman and her husband before.
Absolutely.
Did
But we
she-
had no idea this was coming.
Well, none of us do.
Exactly. I mean, she seemed to be, you know, she wasn't healthy, but on the other hand, she wasn't dying anytime soon. And all of a sudden this happens.
Because that could have been a car wreck or something.
Could have been anything, right? Could have come to Texas. Too many people down here. Got plowed down by something or whatever.
Or you freeze to death up there.
Or you freeze to death up there. You know, I don't know if anybody's frozen to death in South Dakota in a long time. Now, there have been people that have fallen into the water because they've been out there ice fishing and the ice isn't all that thick right now. And they've died, but maybe the problem was they were ice fishing in the first place. I don't know that they were drinking beer. I'm not sure about that. This is back to working? Okay. Where are we at here? Oh, yeah. Okay. How do we make this decision? The way ethics tends to work is they think in these terms. So they think of non-malevolence, which is a huge word. It simply means do no harm. What would harm be in this case? Let's not do that. And the family's pretty clear. They didn't want to do anything that would cause her more trouble. And they were pretty clear about how can we make it so that she's okay. Actually, when they took the ventilator off, she had this, I don't know what the thing is, but something about back in here, and her breathing got to be really hard, and it was just really hard to be in the room. She was gasping for air, it seemed like. And you know what that's called? I don't know. But something that had something to do with the back of her tongue back in here was causing this to close off. So they ended up turning up the morphine a little more to calm her down. Yes, they gave her morphine. I mean, she was already attached to, so they gave her that. There was some other thing they put in there to kind of open it up and see if they could do it. And after about an hour or two of just really bad, I calmed down. But it was really bad there for a little bit. Beneficence means to do good. What's the best thing we can do for her? Justice is let's treat her fairly. The question that was asked was, if this was your mother, what would you do to the doctor? The doctor I've met him before. He was an excellent guy. He says, number one, just because I would do this with my mother doesn't mean that you do this with your mother. We are not the same. We have different sets of values and all kinds of things. I don't really know you. You don't really know me. So while it's an interesting question, it isn't really answerable. But that's justice. Will we do the same for everybody? And the last one is autonomy. And in medical ethics these days, autonomy is the question. Who gets to make the decision? Mark, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was thinking back on the first term in non-malevolence. You started off saying that the doctor would move her out of ICU. But at that point, I would have said, is that going to be harmful to her?
Well, she cannot stay in ICU because they aren't doing any for her anymore.
Okay.
I mean, there are protocols, there are ways of doing things that says, if you need this, you're here. If you don't need this, you're not here anymore. Now, he wasn't moving her out within the next 5 minutes.
No, but I get the
In
sense.
fact, he came and talked to them, it was about noon on a Friday, and said this kind of thing is happening. I was actually doing a funeral almost 200 miles from there at that point. So I got in my car and I went immediately down there. They didn't want to make any decisions till I showed up. And so that takes about, South Dakota's like Texas. The speed limits are kind of iffy and all that. So 200 miles is, what is that, 2 hours? No, actually, it's about 3 hours to do that. Hey, you know what the speed limit is in South Dakota, for the record? 80.
Still like be safe and prudent or something.
Yeah, but we have no cars and no people, so it doesn't really matter. It's fine.
I think he has a point though, because it becomes a question. I mean, obviously she wasn't expecting this, but as soon as you get the medical professionals involved and they do all that stuff, then everything you stop doing, you feel like you're maybe doing harm.
Sure.
So you're not necessarily what if we just never called the ambulance in the first place and been like, oh, looks like you're going to die because you can't breathe. But that's what you do sometimes with people on hospice. It's like, please don't call the ambulance because all we're going to do is come here and intubate you and you're going to die in the hospital rather than at home, which is, from your metastatic cancer. So it's kind of harder than you think. It seems simple, but...
So legally, there's no difference between not having something and taking it away later. But it feels different. It feels different taking it away because somehow we're actively doing something. But bottom line here, she's dying no matter what. And we're not really making decisions about death. She's dying. There's nothing that anybody can do at this point about that. The only real questions are, and he isn't that blunt, but he's trying to be kind and all that kind of stuff. And when I show up, I tend to be a little blunter. Because I got something on my side that the doctor doesn't have, right? I mean, finally, she's going to heaven here pretty quick. And some of you know me, I tend to be pretty straightforward. Okay, so the problem is, if you can't make the decision for yourself, it's called substituted judgment. Somebody has to make it for you. If you're going to make a decision for yourself, you have to be able to understand what's all that's happening. That's called informed consent. Do you all understand informed consent? Congratulations, I don't really. If a doctor comes in and says, this is what we're going to do, I don't really understand fully what he's talking about or what she's talking about. Because I don't have the background they have. Right? We're going to work on your, have I told you my wrist story? I'm going to put my wrist back together again the second time. I asked the doctor, should we do this? He says, yes, I love a challenge. I'm like, okay. I really want to be a jigsaw puzzle for the doctor. This is my goal in life. When I grew up, I wanted to be something that the doctor could experiment on. Should I do it or shouldn't I? So there's a knowledge base. There's changing circumstance. At this point, maybe it's a good idea, but at this point, maybe it isn't a good idea. And within, in her case, 12 hours, things changed dramatically. She was at the pulmonologist, the doctor who deals with breathing, and within a few hours, she can't breathe. I'm not blaming the doctor. That's how it goes. All right, here's the question. If we're supposed to be autonomous beings, how does that fit in with who we are as Christians? What do we tend to call autonomy in the church? So the students that are in the room have already heard this, and I call it sin. Right? Autonomy, me making decisions on my own, is called sin. When people started making decisions on their own, they decided to eat some fruit, and then the fruit got them into trouble. And what was that fruit?
Fruit.
I know, kumquat is what I think, because they taste terrible, but I don't know. It's some sort of fruit of the tree of knowledge of good of evil. They ate it, and apples are good for you. It can't be an apple. So they ate this fruit and they got themselves in real trouble, correct? If I make decisions on my own, I'm also just flat out stupid because I am, right? And anytime I make decisions on my own as a married man, I get myself in real trouble, including deciding what I'm going to wear today. You're not really going to wear this, are you? No, I think I am. No, you're not really going to wear this. Okay, yes, I think you know better than I do about what I should wear or what I should do, right? And besides that, I'm not an autonomous being, not even Ruth and I, because I have kids. And what I do has an impact on them. And more importantly, I have grandkids, right? And it's even better. And I got these two people that call me Papa all the time. And you know, whatever they say, I'm doing, because that's what I'm going to do, whatever they want to do. And they're like, oh, Papa is here, we're just going to have a blast, we're having fun, because there are no rules. There were very few rules when I had kids, but there are even less now. The problem with this is substituted judgment is, how do you make a decision for somebody else when they might change their mind regularly? My wife's never changed her mind, of course. But how somebody else might have changed her mind once in a while. And how do you make a decision that's accurate? I once went to a lecture led by an ethicist out of the big hospital system in Milwaukee. And he did a little experiment. He took a document about what could happen and what would you do, some circumstances, to two people. And he said, why don't you fill it out on behalf of the other, and you fill it out on behalf of the other. They were right about 50% of the time. He'd filled out the same forms because they were his parents. And he wasn't right 50% of the time. So here's just this little family of people that are heavily involved. I mean, I think he said his father was a doctor, in fact, that they couldn't guess what each other wanted. And then you put in family. And is family perfect? Don't ask him. Don't even ask him. Oh, that was you. I keep saying family. Everybody should have one. You know, because there are a few challenges along the way. And I have never found a family that got better the day pressure was put on them. It just doesn't seem to work that way. So how do you make decisions? Autonomy is the first step. Substituted judgment is the second step. I would like to argue now for something else. And it's the last step up there. What does that mean? Or at least to the patient. So when my children were young, I did not ask them. My daughter was 2 and she had pneumonia. We did not ask her if she wanted to go to the hospital. Ruth and I made a decision. I had a funeral to do that day, so it was really hectic and really tough. But we still made a decision. Doc says she needs to go to the hospital. We took her to the hospital. Took her in the hospital, and these days they weren't too smart. So they had a crib in the room, and they put the IV in the crib into her. She was in the hospital for a week. She never went back in the crib again, because that's where you get pain. You know, they've learned since then to do this down the hall someplace. And anybody ever came in that room wearing white, she would scream to high heaven. So we had to pay the respiratory therapist a bunch of money so that I could stand there and hold this in front of her mouth, because that person's not getting near her. She was very clear. But we did it because it's in her best interest. She did not like it at all. Someday, my daughter is going to have to do things in my best interest. Correct? She's going to need to take into account everything that's happening at that moment and say, this is what we need to do with Dad. I've told her, you got to take the keys at some point, because that's in my best interest if you take the keys. I probably never will give them willingly. If she gives me keys, I always have keys in my pocket, so I have to have that. I've told her clearly, never give me a nursing home near a golf course, because I will be out of that building so fast and wandering around you can't believe. So she has to make these decisions, right? Can she ask me what I think? Sure, but it's finally her decision, and I don't want her to have any guilt, or as least guilt as possible. Just do whatever in my best interest, with one caveat. I'm going to heaven. Jesus said it's clear. Just make sure that, that's okay yet. Don't delay that if you don't have to. Does that make sense? We get all wrapped up in these DNRs and all this stuff, and we'll talk more about it on Thursday, but finally it comes down to, do you trust your daughter or your son or whoever's going to make this decision? And yeah, they do stupid things, my kids do, but they learned it from me, so it's okay. We're in this together, right? So I just trust that my daughter will do this. Now my son, I hope he never has to do this, because that's a whole different problem. But my daughter, and she already knows this, that someday she's going to have to make decisions about her parents. Just like someday our brother, not the two of us, but our brother is going to have to make decisions about our dad, and his wife. Now the other brother is doing this because he lives 70 miles from them. And Steve lives in Waco, and I live in South Dakota, and they live in Michigan. And Peter should make these decisions because he's closest, even though I spend all the time thinking about it, and he's a CPA, and he should take care of the money, but that's a different issue. But he's there taking care of them on a regular basis. So the real question is, and we'll talk about this Thursday, do you have somebody that you've already appointed, and have they agreed to it? Because, as we've talked about, it could happen to any of us on any day.
Pass this information along to the son or daughter or whoever's going to
Well, that's what he's asking.
operate in your best
So
interest.
if whoever this is, I need to make sure that they know they're going to make the decisions. So my daughter knows that fully. We actually did the legal document too that says her. And in South Dakota, I don't know what the rules are in Texas. In South Dakota, she would have been the one chosen anyway, according to the law.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay. The challenge is, what is the role of suffering in the life of a Christian? Often people say, I don't want this to happen to me. Right? I never want this to happen. Do you get these choices? Why were you born in, I don't know where you're born, but why were you born in this country as opposed to Rwanda, Ethiopia, Canada? Pick some far off place, I don't care where it is. Why were you born here? Why are you at this place in this time? Why are you able to walk here and be here? Is that your doing? Of course not. If suffering comes, when suffering comes, is that your choice? Does God want you to suffer? No. But suffering is a part of this world. It comes because of sin. Maybe sometimes specific sins, maybe because of just general sin in the world. Why do I have asthma? Did I do something wrong? No. I got it from my dad and my mom. He didn't get that one. You didn't get that one, did you? No. He got other things. I got that one. Okay. Why did I get it and he didn't? I don't know. But I'm not in charge, right? What is the role of suffering in the life of a Christian? When you suffer, is that bad? Well, of course it's bad, Pastor. It's suffering. We're not into this kind of stuff. We're not the type to go knocking on doors just to have people be mad at us and we can suffer. That's not us. Those people come from other places in the world. That's not us, right? We just like to be good kind of people. Just leave us alone and we won't suffer. But of course, it's when I am weak that I am strong, Paul said. And secondly, so it has a benefit for the sufferer. Does it have a benefit for the family and friends of the person? I broke my wrist. I couldn't drive. Actually, I couldn't drive because I was on some really good medication. They actually let me preach on some really good medication one Sunday. I didn't get addicted to this really good medication, but you all know what it is, right? It's this oxy something or other And I just decided I better not drive. And I didn't stay on it very long. But even after I got off of it, I better not drive, right? I have this broken wrist. My legs are working and my arms are. So what happened? A whole bunch of church people got to haul the pastor around. No, actually it was a good thing, right? And so instead of me going to see a shut-in, now we got 2 people going to see a shut-in. Maybe we should have been doing this in the first place. And they got the pleasure of, all right, I need to go see somebody in Sioux Falls. It's 100 miles round trip. Who can take me? Hands go up. We're going, right? Got to spend the day together in the car, and I'm fine, right? And they're fine, and the people are fine, and we're good. Does my suffering, my pain, have an impact on others? In this case, it was very positive. It also helped me see how silly sometimes the whole systems are. Because I told the students, the second time I did surgery, the problem was that this was a Makita in here, and they only had DeWalt's. The screw bit was different. They had to take it out and put a different one in, and then they had to go through all the process of sterilizing it, and I'm sitting on a gurney while this is all happening, and it was cracking me up big time. I don't remember whether yellow was the right one and green was the wrong one, but I had first surgery done in one hospital and the second surgery done in a different hospital, and I have 13 screws in my wrist on the way down. Do you have anything implanted in your body? Yes, I have something right here. So I told them once. But, it's a whole thing, right? Suffering allows us to help others, even though we don't like it. Do you know the name Henry Nouwen? Henry Nouwen is a Roman Catholic priest. I don't think he's alive anymore. But he wrote for about 4 or 5 years, he worked in a place with people who couldn't talk or move or hardly anything, severely disabled. And he gave them baths, and he took care of them, and he did everything. And he learned more from them than he learned from anybody else throughout his life about Jesus and his love. The amazing thing is we all want to give, right? We want to give. It's better to give than to receive. Where's that written? It's a Hallmark card. No. Way to go. What seminary did he go to? It's actually in the book of Acts, right? You know this? Jesus said, better give than receive. But if I'm giving all the time, who's the receiving? And sometimes maybe I'm called to be the recipient. And just to stop for a minute and let other people help me. Although nobody likes to do that, but maybe it's an important thing to do. Okay. Last topic. So we talked about some ethical issues at the beginning of life. And there are many challenges there. There are all kinds of ethical issues when we get to substituted judgment. The one I talked about tonight is a fairly easy case, right? I mean, this isn't very hard. She's dying. There's nothing much more we can do. They waited till I showed up because they wanted me in the room before they made a decision. And I'm like, okay, what are we waiting about? And the doctor said, yeah, you can stay here another night, and then tomorrow we're going to move them to move her to another facility. And the great thing was I was starting on my way down Saturday morning to go see her, and I got the phone call and said, guess what, Pastor, she went to heaven. So I didn't have to drive all the way to Sioux Falls. She didn't get moved to another facility, not out of that room, and I just met the family back in the town where they're from, and a little later in the day, and we got to celebrate God's grace. Now, her husband is 71. He's been a widower now since last summer. And when I asked him the question, you could tell that it was still hurting. So there's still pain, there's still trouble, and it's a challenge, but we all know what Marcia believed and where Marcia is on God's promise. Some of these are very hard questions when it comes to substituted judgment. Actually, most of them are pretty easy. Because by the time you get to these questions, it's pretty straightforward. Now, I mean, take my word for it, but often there are a lot of things to get to that point. But when it comes to the end, it actually gets fairly... So we talked about those. Here's a whole different issue. And 1/3 of the population of the United States, all of Canada, has the right now to go to a physician and ask for some medication and end their own life. I was asked by a pastor who's part of the group called the Canadian Association of Lutheran Churches, CALC, which I think Mark, you're a part of that group, right? And Teresa, you're not. I know one knows it. Mark's part of this group. He and I were at the same meeting together. A pastor asked me, I'm the guy from America. I went up to Canada and Ottawa to give a presentation. This happened. I don't know what to do. Pastor says, I got a member of my church who is going to his doctor to get this stuff, and he wants me there when he takes it and ends his life. What should I do? And all God's people go, right? What are the issues here?
So why do the Catholics seem to have an answer and we don't? Because clearly that priest wouldn't be there.
I don't know whether clearly the priest wouldn't be there. I don't know that for sure. I don't know.
Their doctrine doesn't agree with assisted suicide.
Yeah, but all kinds of things happen on a local parish level that is not in agreement with what they're doing. You know that, right?
I know, but the issue is they have an answer. The answer is you don't do it.
Right. Isn't that our answer?
Surely that's biblical somehow, right?
Yeah. No. Do we want to be involved in sin? So one of my members calls me up and says, Pastor, I'm going to sin today. Would you please come over and be with me while I'm doing it? Right? I mean, it's a ridiculous question. In fact, they don't want pastors doing it, being there when they happen, because it'll stop them from doing it. So in some ways, it's a very simple question. You don't go where sin is happening and be there. On the other hand, this guy is going to heaven, or not. And shouldn't you be there to visit with him?
Shouldn't you have visited with him before?
Well, sure.
And my thought is, who's going to talk to in my behalf to God because I helped this person?
Well, okay.
I mean, that's between him and God. But if he wants me there,
So if this is a sin that you're there, could you be forgiven of the sin? Sure. But do we go into things saying, I'm going to sin now, please Lord forgive me later? That's somehow making a mockery of the whole situation, right? Now we do it all the time. We just never say it that way. You know, we go to communion and we say, Lord, please be with me, forgive me, give me the strength to leave this place and not sin. How far do you make it back before you sin? Oh, you make it all the way back and then you, standing up on here. Okay. Right? Because you get on the way back, you see somebody and you go, oh, really? Or you think about, I don't know, whatever it is, football. This part of the country, they think about the Saints, is that right? Is that correct? I think I knew that, yes. And you know, what are they going to do today and all that kind of stuff? Or do they think about, you know, what I wonder what lunch is? That was pretty good, but wonder, you know. And you get all kinds of things. Luther once had this guy that said he never sinned. So Luther said to him, let's try this. Let's pray the Lord's Prayer together and you think about God perfectly. How far did they get? Not far. Let's just go that way, not far. So we're sinning all the times.
Well, I think you have to I think that pastor has an obligation to tell him not to do it.
Okay, so Robin?
Sorry, I'll say it again. I think the pastor has an obligation to tell him that what he's doing is wrong. Because if the pastor won't tell him that, then who else is going to tell him that?
Yeah, I have
And then, worst case scenario, he goes and dies alone, and feels alone. But gosh, do you really want to make him not feel alone in that? I mean, not that you want to make him feel alone. I don't mean that, but you have to not condone it. You have to be the one to stand up and say, no. He might be just waiting for somebody to say, you don't want to do this.
He asked him for justification for his decision.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't hear you.
Here, I got it.
Oh, you keep running. Those boots are made for running.
Talk louder. He's asking for justification for his decision, an endorsement for sin.
Or what else could it be? He's scared. You know, and do people who are scared do things that they shouldn't do? Teresa?
Couldn't you as a pastor tell him what he's doing is wrong and still be there for him?
Okay, you could be there for him, but are you in the room? I mean, when people do things that are wrong, I go to them and say, you know, what you did was wrong. It's called sin and grace, fancy terms of law and gospel. And say, you know, that was wrong. We talk about forgiveness, and then we give forgiveness, right? But God is with you. He cares for you. He loves you. It's my job to be with people, not to be outside of people. I'm the shepherd, right? The pastor. That's what the word pastor means. Pastor's supposed to hang out with the flock. I just give you a little way of thinking about this. I mean, how many couples getting married are already living together?
Most.
You haven't been here very long.
No, I haven't, and I am not squealing on anyone right now.
Squealing. Salut! Piggy.
No, I don't know.
I think if you were asked, most of them are living together. Is that a sin of willful disobedience to God? Maybe. Is it a sin of my parents got divorced and never worked for them? And I'm not sure how this is going to work. And I just had one recently where the mother of the guy is now paying for the apartment for the two of them to move in together because it'd be cheaper. I have an easier time dealing with people who are sort of outside of the church or on the edge of the church on issues like this and bringing them in because they're weak and they need help than I do if it was somebody in my confirmation class that I've been teaching and knowing for the last 22 years or all of their life, and then they're going to go off and do this. In some ways, this one is easier because I don't know them and I'm helping them who are weak. This is a guy or a girl that I've known all their life. I know their parents, I know their grandparents, and you are willfully disobeying God. Now, I don't know that that makes any sense, but that's where I'm at with that one. Steve, bail me out.
I have a question, and I'm a fairly new believer.
There it goes. I just love how they just went all of a sudden loud.
Yeah. All right, so let's assume for a minute that the pastor in this situation obviously is saved. Let's assume the guy that's going to do himself in, he's saved too. And again, I'm a neophyte, I'm no pastor, but I'm learning a lot. So if that's the case, and they both make the conscious decision to go ahead, okay, I'll be here with you, but it's wrong. It's sin. And maybe by me being here, I'm willfully sinning. And the guy's doing himself in is willfully sinning. But they pray about that and they know that is that not covered by grace, is my question.
I think that's a great question. Are we at
if
all?
I'm forgiven now for that back then, and believe me, I've got a past, and it was hard to let go of. But I've given myself enough grace to let go of that. And it's a miracle. And Jesus Christ spoke to me on Thanksgiving weekend of 2017. And you say to most people in the street, they look at you like you got three heads. But I know he did.
Sure.
And that made the biggest difference. And I've learned an awful lot about grace since then. Still have a lot to learn about that and a lot of other things. But the biggest gift that I got beyond the salvation was somebody telling me is, don't leave grace on the table. What about that, Steve? And that made sense to me, and I worked through that and stuck with that for a long time, and it finally became clear to me. And I like Stephen Bradley a whole lot better now. And I know where I'm going when I'm gone.
Sure.
So I'm all in on grace. If that's the deal, then my future is assured. Now that obviously doesn't give me license to go run wild. You know, that's cheap grace. That's a whole other discussion. But for this particular situation, it just comes to mind that if that's the case, and I really care and love this person from my heart, and maybe it's somebody I really know, and the guy doesn't want to be alone, personally, I would sit there with him and go for the ride and be there and comfort him as he leaves.
Because what could happen?
He might change his mind.
Sure. Or at least he's sorry about it.
Or if he's not saved, he might get saved.
Well, my impression is this is a member of the church, knows
Okay.
grace, all that kind of stuff. Not an outsider, he's an insider. I don't know where he's at with Jesus. I don't know any of those questions, but my impression is that this is somebody who should know better.
The guy that's contemplating the suicide,
Exactly.
he knows better.
You should know better.
Okay.
I mean, this is how tough this gets, right? You notice I didn't give an answer one way or the other. I mean, we don't want to promote sin. On the other hand, we want to help sinners. I told you about this living together thing because that's just easier on me, right? And in some ways, I end up being the dad of the confirmation class. These are my kids in some sense. I care about them deeply. I don't want this to happen to them. But on the other hand, when my kid did something wrong, I'm still there for them. Because, you know the old saying? The first kid could come at any time. The second kid takes 9 months. You know the saying? You never heard this saying before?
No, that's really funny. Completely inappropriate.
So my daughter comes to us and says, guess what? The first kid's going to come at any time. And in fact, we maybe need to move the wedding date up. And what did I do? I cried with her, and I said I love her. And pro-life Lutherans say, okay, we're in for this ride, as you put it. I don't agree with it did. I wasn't promoting it, but okay, we're here. And we had a wedding, and it was a totally sober wedding. My daughter said, if I can't drink, nobody else can drink. Okay, makes sense. And now I have Oliver, my grandson, who, you know, oh, he can't do no wrong. He has done no wrong. Let's just be clear about this. Oliver and I, we're just peas in the pod. We just go out and do our thing. And he found my Nerf gun in my office. Now I have to teach him how to use the Nerf gun because, well, I have an assistant pastor, and if he ever gets out of line, I have to shoot him. So we have all kinds of crazy things happening. But he's found it, so now I have to teach my grandson how to run a Nerf gun. His mother and his grandmother are not sure that this is a good idea. But someday I'm going to actually introduce him to the Three Stooges, too. I mean, that's just the kind of thing it is. So, should I be there? Is the pastor's question. And at that meeting, I did not try to answer it. I tried to raise questions. I just tried to say, okay, we're not condoning sin. We don't want to promote sin. This is wrong. This is totally, how do you get that across to the guy? And on the second side, how do you get it across the guy, we're still here with you, even when you do stupid? You know what I mean? I just think it's amazing how complicated life has gotten. Because when I went to the seminary, I'm sure they never talked about this. But that's a long time ago. There's the act. Now, the other side of this is, what should we do? It's not here in Texas, right? So in 1994, they put together this thing called the Death with Dignity Act. Is there any dignity in death? No, it's the opposite of dignity. Dignity is life, and we were created to live. Now, are some deaths better from our point of view than others? Well, sure. But death is a horrible thing. It's not anything that God wants at all. It was in fact created by mankind who decided they knew better than what God had said. So they put their deal, they put it together. This comes straight off their website. I didn't change this at all. Over the 18 years since it took effect, really in 1998, 1,500 terminally ill patients have received prescriptions and 1,000 have died. Why is there a difference between those two numbers? What?
500 changed it away.
Or died for the most part, the people who, well, one, they just felt comfortable having it and they never used it. That might be one side of it. The second side of it is many of them died of their underlying problems in the first place before it happened. 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Oregon physicians can provide, you have to have 2 docs and all kinds of things. You can't really read the green, can you? So this is their point of view. Death with dignity laws, also known as physician-assisted dying or aid in dying, or in Canada, medical assistance in dying, it's called there. Stem from the basic idea that it's terminally ill people, not the government and its interference, politicians and their ideology, or religious leaders and their dogma. Ooh, doesn't that sound nasty, all those phrases right there? Who should make their end-of-life decisions and determine how much pain and suffering they should endure. It's about autonomy, right? I get to decide how much pain I want to endure. Nobody else can do that. Not politicians and their stuff, and their, not even religious leaders, those people. How can you trust any of them? Oh, I went the wrong way again. So this is the group I belong to. Have I said that yet so far? So the seminary I help with is not necessarily any particular Lutheran denomination. There are 2 faculty members who belong to this group. Have you heard of this group? They're really annoying at times. They're just amazing. They're all related to each other, and there's all kinds of problems, right? Yeah. It's pillbillies. They're out of Missouri. It's kind of an interesting thing. The difference between LCMS and other church bodies, though, is we've been around a long time, and we have a lot of documents on a lot of things. So that's why I use them. I don't think LCMC has spoken on this issue yet, or NELC, and what ELCA was said would not have been good. But advocates of euthanasia as well as assisted suicide have sought to justify the taking of human life on moral grounds by describing it as a truly compassionate act aimed at relieving human suffering. It's a lot, people like talk about it in terms of you take your dog to the vet. If I can take my dog to the vet, why can't I take my spouse to get this done so we shouldn't have to suffer anymore? In light of what the scriptures say about the kind of care God wills that we provide to those who suffer and are facing death, we reject such claims as neither compassionate nor caring. This is on the website of the Death with Dignity folks. So they have religious points of view there, and this is Missouri Synod, where we're at. And it's very clear, and they didn't mess it up, and they just put it right on there, which I thought was kind of amazing.
Go in that direction?
We don't tend to be public like that, is that what you're saying? Or not?
Are you asking if this, go ahead.
Ask what you want.
The question I have, I thought Missouri Synod was supposed to be stricter of the
Well, that is.
Lutheran conventions. And why are they taking?
No, we're on there because they're quoting us. This is where we believe. And in the end of it says, we think it's totally wrong, physician-assisted death. We're totally opposed to it. Our motto is, always to care, never to kill.
Right.
What's interesting
Okay,
is they
misinterpreted.
quoted us directly and correctly, which is amazing. Normally you get stuff and they talk about the church and they get it all wrong. But this time they got it right.
My apologies, I misunderstood the direction.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're forgiven. Right? So they got it right. And this is on the Oregon Death with Dignity website, and it clearly says where we're at. And I think LCMC would agree. And NALC, and whatever alphabet soup we got going today. Right? This is where we're at. So as you said clearly, I'm not disagreeing with you in any sense. This is wrong.
Because we have in our Constitution that this is a thing formed under God. I know it was put in late in life, I think Eisenhower or somewhere in that region. But how can the states then reconcile the fact that God was mentioned in there?
Okay, so what?
And they went on their own way.
What Oregon did to begin with, and other states have followed suit, Washington where he lives, other places, Canada where these people are from, what they've said is now they leave God out of the question in the first place. But even if they were going to talk about God, they also quote other religious people on that website who would say God doesn't want people to suffer. And because God doesn't want people to suffer, and he's given us wisdom, and he's given us medication, we don't have to suffer needlessly. And so we can, in our own wisdom and in our own decisions, make a decision about when to end life. And they would even go so far as to say that we talked about this lady in the ventilator, can we take the ventilator off? Well, it's an artificial thing, sure. But why, if you can do that, why can't you just give something else to help this? And this will help the suffering. And you notice what I don't agree with that at all. I mean, to make it clear here, I'm not agreeing with that, but that's the argument. When we're taking a ventilator off, we're saying this is pointless. We're not getting anywhere. There's nothing else that can be done here. This is an active step to do something. Because we want to stop suffering. And that's a good thing, normally. Can you decide to stop eating? And not me, I'm not doing it. Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so let's just talk about it. Do you have to have food always? At what point does food not be important to you? When you're dying. In fact, they used to talk about you always had to give people food and water, hydration, because if you take the hydration away from any of us, we'll die. How long can you go without food and water? I know somebody who went over 30 days without anything. She's lying in a bed, she's basically in a coma, and she doesn't need any calories. She doesn't need any. And actually, if we pushed water into her, what would happen? She would drown, yeah, because her kidneys aren't working at this point anymore, her bladder's not working, they aren't able to take the water off of her anymore, and just putting more water into her is not the answer. So at some point in life, you don't need this, way at the end. This lady in particular had a stroke, all kinds of things happened, but she literally laid in the bed, and every day her family was there, and every day I'd come see her. She was about 40 miles away, I'd drive and see her, and I kept saying, Lord, anytime now, it'd be great. But it can go a while.
Considered part of the natural process of dying.
It can be.
Or it might be, in certain, like, right?
Yeah, it could be somebody
Part of the
trying-
natural process of dying in certain people who are terminally ill, and that it's usually real distressful to family members, but they're truly not thirsty or hungry.
You know, so it makes sense that we always say we want them to eat, but maybe they're at the end of life issues, they're at that stage where their bodies are shutting down, they don't need it.
They do. It's normal that food doesn't taste good anymore, particularly cancer patients and stuff. And eventually the body just doesn't eat anymore.
How many calories, let's talk you and I, because we're of the same size, how many calories a day do we need to have? Well, I think I need a bunch. But we can go a while, the two of us. I have some reserves built up here. You skinny people are going to be in trouble. There's a drought coming, but I am not, because, you know, we can go a while without this. So back to what Wendy was saying, that could, or Rob was saying, that could be the end of life happening.
Here's a real life situation. Her name is Thelma. If you'd like to include her family in your prayers, that's perfectly fine. she had a very aggressive cancer, breast cancer, about 5 years ago. That got sorted out. In the summer of last year, a new cancer resurged itself. She had some treatments. She felt at that point that she made a decision that that was not the way she wanted to go. She didn't want to suffer through all the treatments again. She is a devout Christian, believes that she's going to be with the Lord when she leaves. Her children feel the same way. The doctors said she wouldn't live past Christmas. So she was admitted into the hospice about 2 weeks before Christmas, believing that she wasn't going to go much longer. She's had her ups and downs. She's had days where she takes in water, takes in food. She's had days where she just goes and nothing at all. All she's on is pain-relieving medication. And basically, we're all just waiting now for her to go and meet with the Lord. And this is where she is and where her family is right now. The interesting thing that I heard just recently is that the doctors are saying that all her internal organs are functioning really well, but they think now that the cancer is progressing to the brain. So now the question is how much longer is she going to keep going? And this is just where she is. She's just being comforted, and we're just waiting for her to be with the Lord.
Yeah, and what we're talking about now is the goal of care.
Exactly.
At some point, the goal of care is to heal. At some point, the goal of care is just to take care of people. Because there's nothing more, there's no healing coming to this thing. Okay. So, I mean, do we get this? I don't want to get us too far afield, which we've had trouble all day with, and it's mostly been my fault. I'm not blaming anybody. Adam?
This is going to remain on the same subject. My neighbor across the street, Yvonne, who's also a church member, over the course of this last summer, developed a schizoaffective anxiety disorder, and just became completely unable to take care of herself or do anything. And she quit eating and drinking. And it went long enough that they forced intervention on her because, she's not physically sick.
Sure.
So in her best interest, even though she wanted to die because of what was going on in her head.
There are other reasons why people can do this. Yeah,
Right.
Absolutely. I'm trying hard to, at this point, okay? Because I agreed to 8 o'clock.
Gotta get rest.
No, I'm trying to be, if I go over on Sunday morning, I better have a good reason for it. Right? My people are not going to walk out, but I probably should have a good reason for it. We could continue this conversation quietly is what I'm trying to say, and because that's the last slide, I think. Oh no, there's one more. I think there's two challenges here with this particular issue. How do we speak up as citizens of the country and say this is not a good idea? And two, how do we help people in end of life? And this is going to become more and more of an issue.
Working. Adam's comment is, I think that's what's really scary about the whole taking a medication to kill yourself, is when it crosses over from somebody who has a real terminal illness and somebody who's just depressed or just kind of wants to. That's what's really scares me about that process.
Yes, okay, so the problem is, how many people who are elderly are depressed? A good number, because they can't do what they once did. And so the Oregon law requires 2 physicians to talk to these people separately and to do a screening for depression. But can you get through that anyway and then get the medication? Yeah. So yeah, that's the scary part about it. Yeah, please.
No, the scary part about it is when it becomes a business.
Oh, sure, absolutely. No, you're correct. So there's a doctor in California, in LA, because all the fruits and nuts are out there, of course, and he puts up this big sign and says, come to me, I'll give you the pills. So he's running a death clinic. We all knew it was going to happen, right? The next thing that's going to happen, they're going to start advertising on TV, probably, I don't know. Get your pills here.
I did see somewhere in our readings that where hospice becomes more prevalent, even in places where physician-assisted death is legal, that the rates of physician-assisted death goes down as hospice care becomes more prevalent and goes up.
I think that is the goal of the hospice people, but I don't think it's happening.
Said it is somewhere, maybe Denmark? In one of our readings, I can't remember.
Oh, it said it's happening somewhere, perhaps. But I mean, just think about it. The more available it becomes, the more it happens. And it looks like more states are looking into it. Thankfully, in my state, South Dakota, it got, they wanted to put it on a ballot initiative, and it didn't go anywhere. They didn't get enough signatures. We have an interesting state. There are 6 Democrats in the state. We all know who they are. You know, our state is like 80% Republican. They've never elected someone to Washington, D.C. as a president who was not a Republican. There was even this guy by the name of George McGovern, who's from South Dakota, who was not voted in by the South Dakota people. So, I mean, our state is different than other places, but even in a very conservative place like I'm from, it's being talked about. And the real question is, how different is this than what happens on a daily basis in Texas and in South Dakota, where nurses and doctors are giving morphine to people, and they have to find the right level where they're caring, but they're not killing. And if you talk to nurses, they often wonder, or doctors, have I gone too far? You know, this becomes the real issue. And now we're dealing with their own feelings of inadequacy and have I done something wrong?
You know, listening to this tonight, I was telling my friend, I keep on thinking about that case in England where the parents wanted to take the child to another country for treatment. Yes. And listening to this, I think about that little boy and about the parents and about their right not being given to them to take that child to another country for treatment. And with medicine and politics and things that are going on within our country right now, and the call for socialized medicine, then I also think that a lot of choices that are going to be taken away from us and other things may be forced on us sometime. And that's a concern too.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. So that particular case, they're in England, and the English Medical Service, which is a socialized medicine, the doctors are paid by the government, the whole bit, just said that this is not going to do any good. Okay, that's one thing. Then they went to court and said to the judge, they can't come from here because it's not going to do any good. And there were hospitals on the East Coast that said, come here and we'll take care of you. So you got all this stuff going on. And what happened? They got out, they came to this country, and did it do any good? Not really. You know, so these are the very difficult questions we're going to have to deal with. And for the record, where did the American insurance system start? Do you know that? It started here in Dallas. Because during World War II, they could not increase wages for the teachers' union. So in order to give them benefits, they gave them health insurance. Started here. And there was a group that did this. They're called Blue Cross Blue Shield. I mean, that's what they're called today. But that's where it started. And how are we going to someday figure out how to work this all out? And it is going to be, who knows? We have no idea what we're doing to our grandchildren and the national debt. That's one issue. But the insurance side of it is just as scary. But of course, I'm but a stranger here. Heaven is my home. Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible told me so. So I'm not really scared of any of it, because God is with me. And if God is for us, you know the next line? Who can be against us, right? But yes, it's not going to get easier. It's going to get more difficult. That's why I believe churches need to be talking about it. And Christians need to be thinking about it. And we need to be talking about how do we help our parents, if we're my age, or if you're the other age, that what they're going to do. But, I mean, literally, I could go home today, not home, to a hotel today, and between here and there, be wiped out. So it isn't just about those who are over a certain age need to talk about it. It's all of us. And Thursday night, we're going to talk about it. There's a place up in Wisconsin. Have you heard of the state, Wisconsin? Called La Crosse, where 96%, 98% of the people have already filled out advanced planning. The hospital there is called Lutheran Hospital, Gunderson Lutheran Hospital. And they have a whole different way of doing things, and it seems to work so much better. Because you don't end up with care you don't want. And you end up with better care because they have now focused on what is really important. We were talking, his mom's having some tests today. Are these tests really important or not? His mom fell, and now they're running some CT scans and some MRIs and some all kinds of things. At some point, those tests are necessary, and we're spending money we shouldn't. At some point, they are necessary, and that's the real challenge. Because I'm not opposed to medical tests. I knew you were.
No, I have a comment about that. It was like a epiphany I had, because I always thought like, well, like what is the business, so we should just, spend whatever it takes. But then at one point I realized like, if you're doing stuff that's not helpful, if you're doing tests or treatments that aren't helpful, and because the doctor's recommending it, you should do this, or the doctor's making money off of it, worse, or the hospital, whatever, then you really are doing harm if you just drained grandma's life savings and there's nothing, so it's harder than it seems, because I always would think you'd just err on the side of like, just spend all the money, whatever, just do the tests, just let the insurance pay for it, get everything for everybody that we can. But you do harm if you spend wasteful, just inappropriately, and then you see these graphs, and it's really hard of like how much we spend at the end of life in our country compared to other countries. And so, you think like, well, I don't want, the socialized medicine telling me that I don't get to have the treatment I want. That's the first thing I think when I see that. But then again, if you just got by some whatever charlatans or maybe super well-intentioned doctors that just got you to spend a whole bunch of money on a treatment that extended your life, who knows how much, a week.
Couple hours.
And you spent $300,000 on that, or reverse mortgaged your home.
So what is the figure you've heard? I've heard almost up to 50% of all health care is in the last 3 months of life.
Yeah.
It's more like 80%. You spend 80% of your expenditures in the last 20 years.
Yeah, okay, there's the 80-20 rule, but another way of putting it is all of the health care money that we're spending in this country goes to people, half of it goes to people in the last 3 months. I mean, that's a figure that's out there. I don't know if that's actually true or this is urban legend, but I mean, that's what I've heard.
I don't know the number, but it sounds
Something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? So just so we get it, Thursday night we're going to do a totally different idea. We're going to do how do you talk about these things with your family. It's much more of a practical, this is important, we've now done, how do we do this? And so I really believe that this is not a job of the physicians and the nurses to do. I mean, they could do it if they want, but it's a job for people to do. Just regular, ordinary folks to talk it through. Yeah.
Yeah, so I hate to let this stand because it's a bad premise that keeps being repeated a lot. I've been in the healthcare industry for over 25 years. So whenever we compare ourselves to these other advanced countries, there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, they have a very homogeneous population. 6%. Denmark is 92%. They don't have the same life characteristics that we have. 300 million people here in the United States. So the cost structure is totally different. The other problem that you have with that type of statistic is it never looks at the benefit. What's happened is with the medical advances that we've made in pharmacology and all the different processes, we now have people living and active far much longer. So there's an economic benefit that should be factored into that equation. But it's not politically convenient to look at that. It's easy to look at the cost and then try to beat people up on that. But the reality is that we have so much better care now. Maybe the distribution is a little weird, but again, if you look at the care to countries where they live there, like the United Kingdom, it's not a fair comparison. So
Yeah.
I just want to make some of these points out there for people to see. You hear so much of what is essentially tainted statistics.
Is it possible to mess with statistics?
Yes, I did it
So,
for 25 years.
so my favorite statistic, what percentage of marriages end in divorce? What do you hear? Half, right? Totally bogus. It has nothing to do with reality whatsoever. But that's the statistic that's out there. The statistic comes from this, and these are just generalized numbers. There are 100,000 marriages this year and 50,000 divorces. That means half of all marriages end in divorce. I mean, it's just bogus, right? Because where do the divorces come from? Well, they come from the people who have been married the last 40 years. Now, if this continues forever, then it'll happen that way. But at this point, the probability of a first marriage lasting is like 60-some%, like almost 66% of first marriages that last until death. So you get these bogus statistics that are out there all the time. Yeah. If we want to do healthcare stuff, we could do that. I mean, it's a whole big issue. There are places that maybe do it better in some ways, but there are places that don't. So, for example, just one little thing. How much marble is in hospitals? And why is there marble in hospitals in the first place? You know what I mean? I mean, that's something simple as, why are they the fanciest buildings in town? Do they need to be the fanciest building in town? I mean, that's a different issue. I mean, that might be just a small question we could ask. Why are they the fanciest buildings around? In France, you actually go to a pretty little small office, you pay your bill the day you're there with a doctor, you're reimbursed in 30 days. I mean, there are ways of doing things that might be better or worse. But it's just an interesting question. Right? Are they that way here in Texas? You all have marble floors as you walk in, and big atriums, and oh, everything's a big atrium in Texas.
Mexican restaurants have big atriums.
It's just an interesting, why are they fancy buildings? Okay, I think we've had enough. We had enough for tonight? We should close with prayer. In our prayers, remember Adam's mom, whose name is Christine, who had some real trouble today. We remember Dale, who works for ILT. She is one of the staff members' wife who has been diagnosed with breast cancer. Are there other things we should pray about? Yeah, Lou? Nancy at your home congregation.
She expressed to me Sunday as I was leaving. She has an appointment this week and they think she might have cancer.
All right, so Nancy, who might have cancer, Christine, and Dale. Dale is actually a woman's name, just so we get this straight. Yeah? Get this country, let's get this country back in the way it should be. Good thing we're asking God to do this. Yeah, no, yeah, we got, none of us are pulling this off. Stage 3 colon cancer. Her name is Sarah. country. I'm going to have to get a pen if we go any further than this. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful that you have given us the knowledge, the truth, that you planted in our hearts the good news that we are yours now and forever. We're thankful that you've taken care of eternity through your Son who died for our sins. We're thankful we've been joined to him in baptism. We belong to him now and forevermore. Please, Lord, be with us as we look forward to being with you. Help us to lift up our heads and look forward to that day. And until that day, continue to give us wisdom and knowledge as we go through life. Help us to be a support to those who are getting closer, and help those who are in great need to know your love and your compassion. Please be with Sarah, who's going through cancer treatments, and Nancy, who might have cancer. Be also with Christine and Dale, who's now starting treatment this week. Be with our nation. Help us to figure out how best to care for one another, that we might live peaceful and quiet lives. Be with each of us, Lord, that we might do your will. Help us always remember your grace and your kindness, that you've forgiven us and called us to forgive others. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.